Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Alistair Greig. I'm the Managing Director of Fastman. I am joined today by David Henshaw, who's our VP of Products, also known as our CTO. Today, we are delivering the second in a series of webinars around information integrity in the cloud. And today, we're focusing on permissions and access control, our solution set around that, and also some of the considerations that we have around how that is designed and built and delivered. So as you would know, Fastman ensures the security and integrity of information management. That's our sort of mode of operating, if you like. Over the years, we've evolved into various roles, but that seems to be what we focus on these days, ensuring security and integrity of information, of enterprise information. We have a number of solutions that we offer in this area. Many of them you'll be familiar with from past experience. And today we are focusing on our permissions and access control solution set. And we'll be talking a bit about the rationale, the background, the logic, and how the various solution set elements tie together. So we start off with some statements of fact, I guess you call them, or observations we've made over the years when we were built and delivered these solutions. We start with what does our customers actually want? When we go and talk to customers about access control and permissions management and so on and so forth, these are some of the messages we hear on a repeated basis. Our customers want simple ways to manage access control. They don't want complexity. They don't want difficult. They don't want things that take a lot of time. They want things that be able to that can be done in a fairly simple, straightforward way. And they also want to manage the risk of information breaches. So minimizing those risks is really important, and increasingly so as we go through, as time goes on. Maybe 10 or 15 years ago, it was important, but it wasn't so front and center in everyone's mind. So they also are really keen on the message we get is they're really keen on structured processes and comprehensive tools. So they don't want to have piecemeal solutions to a problem which extends over multiple parts of their application or their system. So they want to be able to have a set of tools which includes a number of all of the elements that they're after to manage access, and where they can essentially step back and look at things in a simple way and get a totally transparent overview of what access is provided to whom, how it's delivered, and where it's come from, and things like that. And also from a management and a information governance point of view, from a organizational governance point of view, they want comfort that any breaches that are identified can be quickly and reliably rectified. And we at Fastman think that we've come to realize that customers deserve the tools to do this. They deserve the tools to do it efficiently to ensure the security of their information, and they don't want to have to repeatedly come back to service providers or solution providers to ask for more. They want basically the tools to be able to do it out of the box, and that are maintained and consistent with their platform upgrades and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, they want to be able to trust the information that they've got and use it with confidence, knowing that that these tools exist. They're not going to end up in a financial black hole when they get these, when they've got to do some work in this area. Organizational changes, all this sort of stuff can be cost effectively managed. So these are some of the key messages that we've got over the years, bearing in mind that we've been doing this for over 15 years now. Now, under the covers, the OpenText Content Server or Suite platform, or the extended ECM platform that we're all familiar with, is a bit of a complex beast. It's got, in terms of access and security and permissions and so on, it's got a lot of moving parts. And David and I spend a lot of time over the years just going through them, how they all work, and David's going to talk about some of the intricacies of that in a minute. But it's got a lot of moving parts, and oftentimes that's not obvious to the end user, and it's not obvious to even the system administrator. But those pieces all talk to each other, they interact. And as time goes on, this is becoming more complex. If you go back 10 or 15 years, or 10, not even that long really, the system that we're talking about, the content suite or content server environment, was a fairly simplistic product. Extended ECM existed, but it wasn't as widely used as it is now. Now we're adding layers on top of it, and the justification, the business case for the continued operation of a system like the Content Suite platform or Extended ECM, a lot of it's built around the ability and the capability of the platform to do these additional sort of workloads, if you like. So it's becoming more complex. And you know, a lot of people over the years have said, well, roles access gets more complicated. With roles, things get simplified. The actual fact, it's the other way around. What you're doing with roles is laying on top of the current permissions model. So permissions includes both users and groups and roles. You're laying on top of it this other layer of access control. A lot of it's driven by those other platforms, those other systems that are interacting with Content Suite. And if you're not careful, those things happen in an opaque way. We've used that word over the years a lot, but a lot of times they're used in an opaque way. And so it's really hard to figure out and see easily what's happening with permissions and access to particular items and so on and so forth. The other thing that's happening at the moment, and we talked about cloud as part of the themes of this presentation, the other thing that's happening is that the cloud itself adds complexity. A platform like Content Suite Extended ECM, whilst it's a web-based application, and it's always been a web-based application, the constraints or the considerations that are around when you start to deploy it to a cloud environment, those considerations need to be taken into account. You've got more people involved. You've got commercial considerations. You've got some of the basic things like no longer do you have access to the core admin accounts that you would otherwise walk around to the corner to your data center or talk to someone internally. Those things, for very good reasons, with a lot of logic, are now either locked up or locked away or split into different roles. So that is complexity, and it's not always a technical complexity. It's more of an operational complexity. So how do we deal with it? So how does Fastman help you as a customer, as a user of this platform, manage this situation? So in the past, we've talked about Permissions Manager, and you've heard us talk about that at length, and we've done a lot of demonstrations and so on. When we've sat back and looked at it, and we've looked at what we're doing, we've come up with this concept of the triangle of trust. So we try to, again, go back to that needs and wants and desires of customers to have a simple way of doing this. And so you've got to try and simplify all the elements of it. So we come up with this concept of a triangle of trust, and we've extracted out of the Content Suite sort of environment, or the world that we're used to working in, and we see working with our customers working with, three fundamental elements. Now, a lot of you will say these are familiar, but let's talk a bit about how they work together and what they do, and the confusion that often exists around those elements. So on the first point, you've got your permissions and roles. So users, groups, roles, and so on and so forth. And David, feel free to chime in here if you want. But the premise here is that this is controlling what you can do, or what a user or a group or a role can do at item level. It's not controlling what they can ultimately do in the system. It's controlling what they can do at an item level. And as you would know, even on its own, that becomes complex because there is functional aspects of the system, the way it operates, which do influence this considerably. But it's not about what you can do; it's what you can do on an item, and you are constrained a lot of times by those 9 flags, the CC contents, and so on and so forth. The second piece of this triangle of trust that we talk about is access itself. And you might say, well, hang on, permissions and roles is access. Well, we're defining it slightly differently here, because what we're defining it as here is what functions a user or group can do, regardless of the data or the feature they're using. So are they able to add a document? Are they able to edit a document? Can they download it? Can they even view it? Things like that. These are not things that they are permissions driven specifically. They're just core functions of the application. David's going to talk to this a little bit more in a moment. The third piece is object and usage privileges. Now you'll see that there are colors involved in this triangle. The blue pieces are the pieces we don't touch fundamentally. We have to respect and recognize and work with. The red circles are the pieces that we're going to talk about in some more detail coming up. Object and usage privileges, though, is really a simple thing. It's just basically what features a user can use. Can they use web reports? Which part of web reports can they use? Can they use some of the viewing capabilities? If they can, if it's restricted to which particular users, what's the group of users and so on and so forth. And what object types can they create? Can they create a folder? Can they create a document? Can they create a workflow? Things like that. So, and again, it's not specific. That's not specific to location. It's whether they can just do that. It's a pretty black and white statement. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to David. David's going to talk about some examples here of how these three elements work together and what you've got to think about when you're managing those as an overall access control sort of model, if you like. David.
Thanks, Alistair. Great introduction. I'm going to work my way somewhat backwards to the previous slide. So as Alistair mentioned, things like object and usage privileges at an administrative level are global. You're enabling or disabling the ability for somebody to do something within the system in its entirety. That may or may not meet business needs. For example, I may wish to deny the ability for people to add folders in particular locations, but permit those folders to be created somewhere else. That's not something that you can do with the out-of-the-box usage privileges. Whilst you can deny the ability for a user to create a folder, that is across the entire system. And what we're looking at with our product suite is the ability to be much more granular in that level of control and provide access to functions within the system, not based upon permissions, not based necessarily solely upon usage privileges, but rather based upon metadata-driven rules, e.g. the location of the content that the user is working with. Perhaps an attribute on the object through the categories may, for example, be used to deny somebody the ability to open content based upon an attribute value. Perhaps a classification used to drive business rules. So very much looking at providing the ability to granularly control the access to functions within the system based upon metadata-driven rules.
An example
of that, fairly common, and again, coming back to Alistair's introduction and the point about information integrity, consider the situation with things like categories and the ability for a user to edit attributes on a category in order to record metadata, a critical part of the implementation of an open text system and giving users the ability to essentially tag content for things like search or other business processes. You need to have update attribute permissions to record metadata, but inherently in giving that level of permission, you're also allowing users to remove the categories, which is somewhat contradictory to potentially the requirement of maintaining that category on the content. Again, with our metadata-driven rules, our focus is very much now getting to a stage of being able to take the permissions and looking at things like permissions here and saying, well, we can still deny access to a function based upon the metadata rules to close these little gaps, if you wish to call them, in the business processes. And another topic that we see periodically, again, we come back to that bottom right corner of the diagram on the previous page, and access control or usage privileges, and adding users into or removing users from usage privileges, or using groups to manage usage privileges, which would be a much more straightforward management activity. But how do you know whether you're adding a user to a group that's used in access privileges, or whether you're adding a user to a group that's also used in permissions? Do you really want to be running the risk of adding a user to a group thinking that group is only used for managing usage privileges and object and usage privileges, and then subsequently find that the user has also been added to that group, and that group is also part of your permission structure, and you've opened up access to content that potentially the user should not have had access to. So there's a number of sort of intersections, if you will, between permissions, functional use, and admin usage rights that with our product set, we can provide a much greater level of granular control upon.
Thanks, David. And the other thing that props up, David, you and I can talk about this, is the license use dilemma. So we've come across with a lot of customers these days. We find, well, I say a lot, increasingly number of customers we're coming across these days are rolling out read-only licenses, for example, on their system. And these are restricted based on functional access, not on permissions. And yet the only real tool that's available for, David, you feel free to contribute here, the only real tool that's available for customers to be able to access or control that is actually permissions. But as we know, David, the licensing terms are actually defined around functional aspects, not permissions.
That's correct. I mean, Alistair, fundamentally, the things like read-only licenses, transactional licenses, etc., are somewhat conceptual. They're a licensing term, and it's critical to understand the terms of what you are and are not enabled or permitted to do. A very simple example of that: a read-only license would permit a user to read content but not create content. Whilst your usage privileges, for example, the out-of-the-box usage privileges would permit a user to, or an administrator to deny the ability for a user to create a document, inherently the system, if the user has permissions, will allow them to add a version to a document, even though the usage privileges don't permit that. So it can become a real, I'll use the word nightmare. It can become a real nightmare for customers where they've usually had full read-write user accounts, and then they start to onboard people and adopt or purchase read-only licenses. Do you really want to have to go through and revise and review your complete permissions model across your entire enterprise content to essentially deny people the ability to add version? Or would you rather a blanket rule that's driven by a functional based rule engine that says, well, I don't care what the permissions are, I'm actually just simply going to deny these users the ability to add versions across the entire system? Much more easier to maintain the latter, particularly if users are potentially moving from a full or a read-only or between license types as you change roles within an organization. Much easier to manage that perhaps at the functional level rather than wholesale permission changes on a regular basis.
And you touched on a really good point, David, and that's when we go right back to the start of this session, we talked about what customers deserve, and a lot of what we actually think deserve is a big word, but these things are needed from day one. It's not something that you really want to worry about 6 months down the track, because then you've already got exposure, you've already got a problem to fix. So a lot of these things should be in place from day one, either as you roll out your new system or you extend its use across the organization. These things should be put in place as we start the process. And likewise, from my feedback to your point, David, is that customers come to us and we'll get phone calls from customers basically saying, hey, I need to use permissions manager to do this because I need to check or modify permissions. Someone's done something, and it's a functional requirement that they've got, not a permissions-based requirement. And so, do you really want to be doing that every day? Do you really not? Would you not prefer to have like a better view of the particular parts of your system that you should be changing from day one? It's really important.
We're seeing this more and more, Alistair, as the world goes cloud as well. I could tell war stories, I think, where organizations have gone down a cloud path, be it usually with a third-party provider, an infrastructure, and move things to the cloud. They've got then another party involved in the maintenance of their open text system. Do you really want to have to go through and provide people access to the system for administrative and maintenance purposes and have to review your complete permission model in order to secure the content or sensitive content? Or do you want a a functional-based approach, echoing what we said just before, a functional-based approach where you can say, well, people who are part of my my service provider perhaps just simply do not have the ability to open a document at all. They can see, they can browse, but they can't open.
Yep, it's a good, very good point, David. And moving on from the oops. I'm not sure why my mouse wasn't working there, but moving on from the conceptual and understanding the model and the issues that are in place if you don't do it, looking at the actual tools itself. Obviously, the product that is part of the leading product was part of our solution set here that's been around for a long time and continues to be evolved is our permissions manager product, and it does a lot of the things that you would expect as a customer. I'm not sure why it's not forwarding. It's my mouse is playing up. I'm sorry about that. So it does a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of what customers are looking for in a tool or in a product set to be able to avoid the types of issues that we've been talking about. So it does a lot of things like providing a dashboard view, the need to alleviate ad hoc reporting. All these bullet points that are listed out here are the sorts of things that customers would expect from a product which they would need to use to manage permissions. And one of the customers we worked with recently we did a spotlight for this was the government of Northwest Territories up in Canada, and I've taken the liberty here of just rather than doing a demo of all of the or even just showing screenshots of what Permissions Manager does and how it helps with those types of activities, I've taken the liberty of reusing some of the slides from that spotlight, which was only a couple of weeks ago. And I'll give you the link later on in this presentation. And also, if you're coming to this after the event and you're viewing this on our YouTube channel, I'll make sure that the link is in the description section of the YouTube video as well. But basically, that you can see here the top part of the screen is the dashboard view, whereas the bottom half is what's the word for it? Granular. Click, 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 like we call the click, click, click version. So we need to be able to make sure that we remove the confusion that he's talking about. You can see here that Patrick was talking about the permissions are confusing enough as it is for end users. We want to remove that confusion. We want to make it simple. And you'll see that part of what we do with our solution set here is, as I said, to make it easy for people to do their job without having to worry about this type of stuff. So again, going to the access control that David's just been talking and drilling into, some of those use cases there, you don't want to have users having to navigate through complex business rules or process rules to be able to do things. You want to be able to have things happening automatically and give them good feedback. So when they aren't allowed to do something, don't just throw them up an odd message. Actually say, this is what you're not allowed to do. This is what you need to do about it. Simple things like that. And again, and not based on where they are. If they're on the web interface or their Enterprise Connect or on a mobile client, you do your best within the constraints of the technology to make sure that you help them out as much as possible. So there's a lot of activity in the Permissions Manager product. And as I said, this is not a demonstration of Permissions Manager, but I thought it's really, really important to be able to see some of the things that are in that product from a customer perspective that do address the overall picture of providing or managing security, access and permissions in a content suite extended ECM environment. And as you know, as you may or may not know, probably government of Northwest Territory is based in northern Canada, so they're right up near the North Pole or the polar circle, Arctic Circle, sorry, and they're a long time open text customer. I think they're running at 21.4 at the moment. So these slides are just straight out of Patrick's presentation, and I always like to do this sort of stuff because customers have a different perspective. As a service provider, we see it from a conceptual and from a sort of holistic point of view. But customers, we understand customers. You live with these problems every day. One of the things we talked about briefly is, or we covered off, is the need to have more capability when you go into a managed cloud environment. And regardless of who your service provider is, whether it's it's an OT cloud environment or you're on one of the hyperscalers, you're in a private cloud somewhere, if there's a separation of responsibilities, we need to enable more self-service. Permissions Manager has evolved consistently over the last few years. And one of the things we've added to it, at least recently, and thank you, David, to your team for doing this type of thing, is the ability to be able to do a lot more self-service. So no need to go to a service provider, log a service call, and so on and so forth. Simply give you the tools to be able to do this and enable the business administrators to configure and control various parts of the system or the product as much as possible. Really important for customers. So that's one thing we've done. This is just summarising the Government Northwest Territory. And the reason I put this slide up here is because it has got the link at the bottom. As I mentioned, it's a YouTube video, and you're welcome to go to it. We can put that link in emails that are coming out after the webinar as well. Recently, as I talked a bit about Permissions Manager, recently we have extended the support for role-based access. So I think this was in the release late last year, David, mid to late last year. We've done a lot of work around that as more and more customers are using extended ECM. And going back to the slide we started with at the start, where there was a lot of boxes in the picture, there is a lot of moving parts in the application, and a lot of those, and extended ECM has a lot of rules, I would call it. David, you can or can't do, you should or shouldn't do certain things. When you add a role to an existing workspace, how's that handled? If that workspace is tied to an existing template, David, you might want to talk a bit about this. Actually, I'm putting you on the spot here, I know, but there's a lot of considerations in this area when you start managing roles as well as groups and users through Permissions Manager.
I think the key thing, Alistair, is whilst as you mentioned earlier, the roles add another layer of type of permissions and type of management of access, and the biggest challenge we see is one of change control around that. A change to the roles on a template, for example, is something that is not automatically propagated to all of the existing instances of that template. So how do you manage change within your organization when there are changes to your business processes? And again, those changes may apply to existing workspaces, or they may be a going forward change only. So you need the right tools to be able to manage those changes.
Yep. And we've seen many examples of that over the last couple of years or few years. The other thing we've also done recently, again, thank you, David, and your team, is to improve, as we've mentioned already, the support for cloud deployments. So we've got our product, Permissions Manager is set up to support containerized deployments, as well as the classic sort of VM type build. And we've talked already about the business administration support. So these things have happened already in the product. These are not future. These are things that have already happened. And likewise, we've added point releases recently. The product gets released pretty much on a quarterly basis. And so I'm not putting version release numbers up here, but effectively we're releasing the product on every quarter or every couple of quarters. So just so you know that this is improving and extending as time goes on. The other one, before I move off Permissions Manager, briefly just mention our Permissions Manager for Outlook product. For those of you who are not aware, we have an add-in for Permissions Manager to extend some of its capabilities in terms of effective permission searching and so on inside the Outlook client. David, this is a product that I think you were talking about to me just the other day, about the value it provides, and it demonstrates how Permissions Manager could be extended when it's needed to suit additional use cases. So it's a good, nice little product. And moving on to the second of these bubbles or these circles. So this is a new area which you probably haven't heard us talk about much in the past. So we have a product called Access Manager, which is part of this permissions and access control suite or solution set. As it's been a relatively new product, it's been around for a year or two, but it's relatively new in terms of its functionality. And I'm going to talk a bit now about what it does and why it exists. Well, I think you've probably already figured it out, and what it is that it's going to do in the future. So this is a tool that allows us to control. It's going back to what David talked about and what we did in the introduction. It allows us to control what a user or group can do regardless of data, feature, or function. Sorry, data or feature or location. David, do you want to add anything to this? Do you want me to talk to this? Would you like to?
I think you've got it covered so far. You're doing a great job, Alistair.
Because everyone understand. I always look to David to make sure I'm on the straight and narrow with this stuff. So one of the key things, though, again, back to simplicity, it needs to be done in a simple way. Actually, even just this week, we've spent time, David and I have spent time going through some of the other access control elements inside the Content Suite environment, and it gets really complex really quickly if you're not careful. Customers do not want to have things that are hard to manage. So Access Manager gives you the really simple ability to be able to control this type of functional use, I would call it, or functional access via simple group membership model. So essentially, you define the group, define the scope of what you're trying to control, build a group around it, and the administrators or the business admins, whoever you've got allocated to do this sort of thing, can move people in and out just simply by adding them to the group. And also importantly, a core function as to what this product can do, enforce the read-only license provisions that we've talked about already. And you combine it with Permissions Manager for a really comprehensive access control solution. So it's built around some of the same design concepts, if you like, and some of the and by that I don't mean technical design concepts, but the simplicity of deployment and management and so on and so forth. So the idea is to be able to provide, in conjunction with the object and uses privileges, a comprehensive solution for this part of the application. Now, before I move on to that and talk about the roadmap, you might notice on that diagram that we don't talk about things like records management and extended ECM and so on. And the reason we don't is because these things on that diagram exist in every deployment of Content Suite. They're not something that you add with a module or you choose or not to use. Everybody who's got Content Suite or extended ECM has got these three elements: the permissions, the access, or the functional aspect, if you like, and the object and usage privileges. They exist on every system. So that's if anyone's wondering. So Access Manager, the product, as we talked about, this is really covering the same ground we just covered off, but you can see there's a nice little admin interface. Essentially, it gives you a whitelist of functions that a selected group of users are able to do based on their parameters, and essentially, if they cannot do it, it pops up a nice little message or rights to do this, and again, it goes back to the point. It doesn't matter where the content is, or how they're accessing it. It essentially says no, you are not in a group that is allowed to, or you're in a group which is denied access to this. And also ensures your license functional and security compliance. So again, go back to the read-only or the limited use license scenario. So where you do have that situation, you can define a model, and I'll talk about that now. And this is where we're going with the product now. I've talked about Access Manager. Hopefully it makes sense as to where it fits into the overall access and permissions model. Where's it going? So now some of you will be familiar with our digital signatures solution. It's been around for a few years. It's the tool we have which allows us to integrate with DocuSign for the signing of documents directly out of Content Suite. Under the covers, it's got this concept of profiles. And profiles is not a simple thing. As you can see, there's a lot of arrows. Some of those arrows are relevant in this situation. Most of them are, but this diagram is straight out of the digital signatures solution. But it's got this concept of profiles. And essentially what a profile does is it allows you to provide in that model, in that product, it allows us to define or very granularly control access to system functions or products functions based on a number of criteria, classifications, the location, the actual attributes, and so on and so forth. And based on those defined profile aspects, if you like, then a profile is applied. So as a classic example, you might say that where certain criteria are met, where a set of documents has a certain classification applied, then the set of rules, the access rules that Access Manager will apply, also has available, that set of rules will apply. So we're building that into the Access Manager product. There's a lot of IP in that. There's a lot of background, a lot of logic. We've done a lot of work over the years with that concept, but we're actually extending it, and that's coming out. That's on our roadmap for this year. So David's always very nervous when I start talking about roadmap, because then he gets me ringing him up on a Monday and saying, "How are we going? How's last week's progress?" Anyway, but this is what we're doing. We thought it was a good time to share this with everybody so that you can see where this product's going and why it's important. Is when you start to talk about examples. David, do you want to talk about this? This is something I know you've worked on, but this is a really good example of where this would apply.
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion a few months ago with a customer about, fundamentally the impact of COVID on their workforce and the security of their content when a lot of their workforce are now working outside of an office. And they presented a requirement or a desire that they wanted to deny people the ability to download content based upon whether they were working in the office or whether they were connected via a VPN. So they were still permitting their workforce to connect using a secure network, but still wanted that extra layer of security to say you can browse, you can do workflow, but you can't download a document when you're on a VPN, because at the end of the day, the organization can't control the end device that the user was working with. And that presented an interesting opportunity for us with working with essentially a setup using information that can be derived from open text directory services when the user logs in, and then using that piece of metadata to essentially drive a rule to say, no, you can't execute this function within content server if you came from outside the firewall. So there's some interesting interplays, I think, going on at the moment with how people are looking at security, not just based upon metadata, but also now based upon the geographic location or the device that users are working with.
Yeah, it's a really good one, and it cropped up again the other day when there was another customer was deploying I think it was an Office 365 integration or so on, and they wanted a level of control based on that integration. And again, straight away we think of Access Manager, and the power of the profiles is something that we learned through the digital signatures experience, because it is a really important control mechanism. And once you've got the model set up and defined, you can use it and extend it in a number of different ways without having to reinvent the wheel as such. But it works again. It goes back to this whole concept of this triangle of trust, if you like, where you've got all these different elements working together. And if you think about what we've presented today, we're talking about things which take into account all of the different factors that exist in the broad environment that your system operates in, but it's all done in the context of Content Suite platform. You don't have to reach out to a third-party product to go and manage access and pass rules between different products to be able to control VPN access, for example. It's all done within the context of Content Suite. And that's one of our learnings from Permissions Manager over the years. With our rollback function in Permissions Manager, some of you might be aware of it. If you make a change in Content Suite, on permissions in Content Suite or Extended ECM, but it's a mistake and you want to roll it back or undo it, the information that you need to do that, if you dig deep enough in the system, is actually there, but it's not something that's immediately obvious. And it's the same with this. A lot of as David just explained, the OTDS reference. Some of the information you need is actually already there. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. What you do need to do is to think about how best to use it and how best to leverage it. And that's what we're trying to do with these products. We're trying to make sure that we don't add a layer of overhead, a layer of complexity. We're doing our best to try and make sure that we can reuse what's there, but make it simple, straightforward, and obvious for customers as they use it. So it's and one of the considerations, go back to those first points we raised, is about being able to demonstrate. The one of the ISO 27001 the privacy standard criteria is integrity, and it's not just integrity of the data; it's integrity of the process and the tools. And you need to be able to demonstrate that the tools you're using to present to ensure privacy of personal information are robust, and so on and so forth. And I think that's one of the advantages that we do have with the product set we've got now. They are demonstrably that's the word, demonstrably robust and defensible. So that concludes the product and strategy part of our presentation. For those of you who are interested, and I'll put this into a slide deck, it comes out. We've got a lot of experience, as you would know, and we've got a lot of reference customers. So if you are interested in talking to us about one of these products or one of the solution sets, or talking to David or myself or Brian, our VP of Sales up here in North America, feel free to reach out. We'll provide you with those contact details at the end. And if you are also interested in our complementary services, which we've got, if many of you probably don't realize, we have a services arm as well, which David is intimately aware of, having worked on that and looked after a lot of that for many, many years, then please come and talk to us about that. If you do want to get in contact with us, here are our contact details, and they will be in the mail out that comes to you afterwards. At that point, I think we've covered our agenda, David.
I believe so.
Have I missed anything?
No, I don't think so, Alistair. As I think if I were to say there's one key message that we want everyone to take away, it's if you have a desire, want, need to ensure the integrity of your access control, think Fastman.
Oh, very good. I like that. I'll rate that one. So, and as you move to the cloud, consider the implications of that on this part of your application. And I think if you are considering a move to the cloud, then you should really look at this as an important part of your transition planning. It's very important. Thank you very much.